While we're coming down, let me introduce very quickly Mr. Russell BeGaye, who's the president of the Navajo Nation. Appreciate you being here. Mr. Mike Olen, I hope I pronounced that close. Okay. Treasurer of the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. Dr. Larry Walk, who's Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Public Education and Environment, and Mr. Ryan Flynn, who's the Secretary of the New Mexico Environmental Policy. I appreciate the four of you being here, and since you don't sit down yet. I'm trying to save you some extra space here. Pursuant to the rules of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, and only that committee, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. Would you please raise your right hands? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You may be seated. You ready to go quick now? Once again, anything that you have submitted in writing is part of the record and will be there. We'll ask you each to make a quick statement if you could. Once again, limited to 5 minutes. And as you notice, we'll try and be kind of arbitrary. Arbitrary with those, with the gavel coming down. But we do appreciate you being here as part of this discussion. We will start with President BeGaye. And 5 minutes to give an oral testimony to the committee.
Good afternoon, Chairman Chaffetz and Chairman Rod Bishop. Good to see you all always. Thank you for your support, and also ranking members of the committees. My name is Russell BeGaye of the Kintley-Chitney and Mittahni clan, and I'm the president of the Navajo Nation. I was born and raised along the San Juan River in Shiprock. Years ago, when I was a little boy, we saw hundreds of fish, dead fish, floating down the river. As boys, we jumped in the river catching the dying fish. I had been asking for years why those fish were dead. I did not get an answer until August 13, when Administrator McCarthy came to visit our nation. 1.5 million gallons of radium-226 spill from the uranium mill site located by the bridge in my hometown, Shiprock. We not only swam in that radioactive water, but my brothers ate the contaminated fish. I'm asking members of these two committees to not allow history to repeat itself. Hold the EPA accountable for the toxic spill that occurred on August 5th, about a month and a half ago. Don't let them get away with their negligence. Our people are suffering. Much of the organic crops have been lost. Our livestock are penned up. Our farmers and ranchers are exhausted from hauling water. Our children are afraid of the river. We have been told by the EPA that cleanup will take decades. This is what we will have to live with for years to come. So today we come to ask for help. The White House is silent. FEMA and DOI and other federal agencies are being told to not use their own resources to help us by the U.S. EPA. USPA has made promises, but we have not seen any of these promises fulfilled. The promises remain empty. They are like the thunder we hear over our land, but with no rain. What do our people need? First and foremost is compensation now. The farmers and ranchers cannot wait months before they are compensated for their damages. I know this year's bills will not be paid by these families. Clothing for children will not be bought, and food will be scarce. Have the EPA set up an emergency compensation fund and provide ongoing repayment of losses as they are submitted. Don't be a party to this injustice by having our farmers waive future claims after they get their first compensation checks. Secondly, we need an alternative water source for drinking, for our livestock, and for irrigating our farms. We are asking that wells be drilled, a reservoir built, and water be piped from the Navajo Dam. We want the EPA to build us a laboratory on the Navajo Nation so we ourselves can continuously test our water, our soil, our plants, and livestock. We are asking this committee to tell President Obama to declare the San Juan a disaster area. Only then will other federal agencies beside EPA provide services we need. This will allow FEMA, USDA, DOI, and other federal agencies to provide resources we need now. We're asking this committee to hold a follow-up hearing 6 months from now because we don't want this to become old news a week from now. The Navajo Nation will not let any and all negligent parties to get away with this disaster. We will stand our ground until our river and riverbeds are safe once again for our children to play in and our people to use as a drinking source. The Navajo Nation will no longer stand back when these types of atrocities are done to our people, our land, and our water, for water is life. I just want to thank you for your time and attention, and we will look to your leadership to right this injustice. Thank you.
President, thank you for your testimony. Mr. Olen, probably the correct title is Councilman, right?
Yes.
Councilman, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Bishop and Chaffetz, ranking members, and committee members. My name is Mike Olen. I am honored to be here. I am an elected member of the Southern Ute Indian Tribal Council, which is the governing body of the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the tribe to discuss the Gold King mine spill and its impacts on the tribe and our community. Before I begin, I would like to thank Congressman Young and Chairman Bishop for last week's action approving the Native American Energy Act and reporting it to the full House. The tribe was active in developing that bill and supports its enactment. My testimony at this time, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to mention a few key items from my written statement, and then I would like to answer questions that you and the committee members may have. The Animas River crosses the tribe's reservation downstream of Durango, Colorado, and upstream of New Mexico. Since the Gold King mine blowout on August 5th, the tribe has been extensively engaged in responding to the spill. We first learned of the Gold King mine release when the Colorado Department of Natural Resources notified the tribe on the afternoon of the spill. We immediately responded by implementing our emergency management plan, contacting the County of Office Emergency Management, contacting EPA, and sampling water quality before the spill reached the reservation. In the first days after the spill, it was largely the local jurisdictions who were responding to the incident. The tribe issued a disaster declaration on Saturday, August 8th. Other jurisdictions followed suit. In the days that followed the release, we attended to the needs of the tribal membership. We posted signs closing access to the river on the reservation. We delivered water, bottled water, provided water tanks and water for livestock, held informational meetings with tribal members, and offered temporary housing for our affected tribal members. Additionally, we coordinated EPA testing of tribal member domestic water wells. For the duration of the response, tribal staff actively participated with personnel from other affected governments in the Unified Incident Command and remains engaged in the Incident Command to this day. As of the Friday after the spill, the EPA still did not have a coordinated effort in Durango. In the absence of a federal presence, local jurisdictions, including the tribe, worked together. For example, on August 6th, the tribe's water quality program called New Mexico Spill Reporting Hotline and reported the spill to New Mexico. At that point, neither EPA nor Colorado had notified New Mexico. The county and our tribe notified our sister tribe, the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, of the spill. We also shared information with downstream tribes in the lower Colorado Basin. For the period from August 5th through September 8th, the tribe incurred approximately $170,000 in cost responding to the spill, mostly in staff time. We understand neighboring community businesses suffered losses, and our neighboring local governments also incurred costs. We are working with EPA to obtain reimbursement for costs already expended and future costs that will be incurred, including the cost of continued water quality monitoring. The tribe has long had an active water sampling program funded by EPA Tribal Assistance Program Clean Water Act grants. The tribe's water quality data provided valuable information to all the parties affected by the Gold King mine spill. We tested before the plume hit the reservation and for 2 weeks after the spill. During that time, we were testing daily for over 25 substances, including aluminum, silver, magnesium, arsenic, lead, and mercury. Coincidentally, just 2 weeks before the Gold King spill, we had collected tissue samples from fish in the Animas to conduct metals analysis on those samples. We shared our water quality data, and continued monitoring should provide important information on long-term impacts. Like others, we favor a full evaluation of events leading to the spill and the EPA's performance responding to the spill. However, it's important to keep this incident in perspective and understand its point to a much larger problem. There are estimated to be 23,000 abandoned mines in Colorado alone, causing water pollution problems. Federal leadership and assistance and cooperation among downstream community stakeholders is key to avoiding another blowout and addressing the problem of abandoned mine drainage polluting the upper Animas River watershed. Thank you for this opportunity to be before you today.
Thank you very much. Dr. Wolk, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bishop, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cartwright, and members of the committees. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Larry Wolk. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Medical Officer for the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you my testimony on behalf of the Department regarding the water quality impacts from the recent Gold King mine spill into Cement Creek and the Animas River near Silverton, Colorado. The upper Animas River Basin has a long and storied mining history, and, as with many watersheds in Colorado, legacy mining in the basin has resulted in significant water quality impacts. For years, drainage from the numerous mining areas above Silverton has contributed heavy metal loads into Cement Creek, which eventually flows into the Animas River. Our Water Quality Control Division within the department has routinely but somewhat infrequently sampled the water quality in Cement Creek and the Animas River as part of our water quality program. These samples have consistently shown that the quality of the water in Cement Creek and the Animas River is and has been for years impacted by the mine waste coming from the legacy mines. The Gold King mine is a historic gold mine located approximately 11,300 feet above sea level in the southwest mountains of Colorado near the town of Silverton. On August 5th, 2015, an estimated volume of up to 3 million gallons of mine wastewater containing dissolved metals and sediment was unexpectedly released from the gold mine adit into Cement Creek. Water Quality Division staff from my department almost immediately traveled to Silverton and the mine site to respond to and evaluate the water quality impacts from the release. Our staff took several surface water samples the week after the mine release throughout the river basin, from upstream of Silverton and downriver from Durango to the New Mexico border over a period of 11 days to determine the extent of the impact of the release. In total, our staff took 63 samples of surface water. Initial monitoring indicated levels of copper, lead, manganese, and zinc were higher than when previously monitored in June 2015 prior to the release. By August 11th, however, the levels of monitored metals in the Animas River had returned to pre-release levels. In Cement Creek, cadmium, copper, and zinc continue to be above the historic range for these metals. Throughout 2016, we will continue to monitor the level of metals in Cement Creek and the Animas River. At this time, we do not anticipate adverse health effects from exposure to the metals detected in the river water samples from skin contact or incidental and unintentional ingestion. Our water quality staff has also worked with our Division of Parks and Wildlife of the Colorado Department of Natural Resources to monitor the effects on aquatic life and wildlife. Assessments will continue, but at this point, there appears to be no obvious impacts. There were no fish kills along the Animas River during the plume event, and there were no effects observed on terrestrial animals such as ducks or mammals. Parks and Wildlife also placed fingerling rainbow trout in cages in 3 separate locations in the Animas River in Durango before the mine-spilled plume reached the city. Of the 108 fish placed in these cages, only 1 died, and the others remained healthy during the passing of the plume and after the plume passed through the city. The 1 fish that died was not due to water quality. Long-term impacts from the effect of metals deposited in sediments will also continue to be monitored. These sediments may pose a risk, especially to aquatic life and fish during high water events. We also understand there is concern about the risks to recreational users on the river. Sediment is just one indicator of the health of the river. There is some level of contamination in most, if not all, of Colorado rivers because of past mining activities and the geology of the state. We do not anticipate adverse health effects from exposure to contaminants detected in the water and sediment during typical recreational activities. We also understand that based upon current information, the Department of Agriculture believes the Animas River may be used for crop irrigation and livestock watering. We are unsure of the long-term impacts, but the spill at the Gold King mine does not appear to have significantly affected or changed the water quality of Cement Creek or the Animas River. We are fortunate that the spill did not result in an immediate environmental disaster. However, this does not mean that Cement Creek and the Animas River have not already been impacted by prior damage from the legacy mines. The spill only serves to underscore the issues faced by many states, particularly in the West, where thousands of legacy mines affect the quality of our rivers and streams. High levels of acid mine drainage can have a detrimental impact on aquatic life. The Division of Parks and Wildlife has reported a noticeable decline in the number of trout in the Animas River over the last 10 years. Cement Creek and the Animas River are only two of many water bodies in Colorado that receive historic mine drainage. In the interest of time, I will close my comments and be open for questions.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Flynn.
Thank you.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Bishop, Chairman Chaffetz, members of the committees. Before I begin, I want to thank our representative from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce, who has been here the entire day. And I know this is not part of your district, but you're a New Mexican, and I really appreciate your interest and as well as your willingness to stay all day. So thank you very much, Mr. Pierce. I am the Secretary of Environment for the state of New Mexico, as well as the Natural Resource Trustee for the state of New Mexico. And I was on the ground in Farmington, New Mexico, within 18 hours of receiving notice of the spill from the Southern Ute tribe. Almost immediately after being notified, our governor, Susana Martinez, appointed an emergency response team, which I had the honor of serving as the leader of for the 9-day ordeal that the state of New Mexico, as well as other downstream users, including the Navajo Nation and the state of Utah, was forced to endure as a result of EPA's spill in the Animas River. It has been said that pressure reveals true character, and I am extremely proud of the manner in which the state of New Mexico, as well as the local communities, responded to this event. New Mexicans demonstrated compassion, courage, determination, and grit throughout this 9-day ordeal. And having been there and in the community, I cannot underscore how frightened people were by the toxic plume that was traveling through the river. The river literally goes through the heart of these communities. It is the heart of the community in Farmington, in Aztec, and in the Navajo Nation. And without water at home, and with this toxic yellow sludge floating through the river in the center of town, people literally were confronted by the spill at home and outside. And in the face of these circumstances, New Mexicans responded as I would have expected. They came together with a well-orchestrated and selfless plan to move forward and respond to the emergency at hand. In particular, I want to commend the efforts of the local officials from San Juan County, New Mexico, the city of Farmington, and the city of Aztec. From the very top to bottom, these officials responded admirably. They integrated themselves into our emergency response team, and they took initiative and acted heroically throughout the process at all levels, from their leaders, the CEO, the COO of San Juan County, the mayors, all the way down the line, their staff from top to bottom. They were essential to this effort. I also need to compliment my staff. I had dozens of employees mobilized in the field. People literally were supposed to be dropping their children off at college that weekend, and because New Mexico needed them, they traveled hours from around the state to be there in Farmington during this ordeal to help. And I had employees who were out. The temperatures were well into the 90s on most days. We had set up a mobile lab that I talk about in my testimony. And I had literally over a dozen employees out there from morning until late at night, working in very cramped conditions and hot conditions in a makeshift lab. And at no point did anybody complain, lose their temper, or do anything other than ask what more could they do. Can I stay an extra day? I've changed around my vacation plans. I'll stay next week. That was the type of response from my employees. I set a high standard for them. I pushed them hard, and I couldn't have been more humbled by their response, as well as the response of all the other agencies from around the state, the Department of Agriculture, the state engineer, the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, the New Mexico Department of Health, and the New Mexico Department of Homeland Security all performed admirably throughout this process. By Saturday, thanks to everyone's swift actions on the state and local, thanks to the state and local community swift actions, we had been able to secure all the public water systems and private domestic wells in the area. We had been able to preserve and protect our local agricultural resources. We'd established direct lines of communication with downstream communities. We established teams with local farmers and ranchers to provide water for livestock. We had set up watering stations across the area, and we had deployed various teams of scientists to monitor the water quality and wildlife in the Animas River. We had also authorized emergency funding. Again, these swift, well-orchestrated activities are a testament to the local communities and the leadership at every level of the state. It's an honor, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. With the possible exception of your shout-out to Congressman Pierce, I don't want him to get a big head about this stuff, but you may be accurate, but that's beside the point. We're now going to turn to questions of the committee. We'll start with Chairman Chaffetz, or his questions of you.
Thank you all for being here. And to those most directly affected, our hearts and prayers go out to those people. We thank you for your willingness and your time to come testify today. I'm going to focus, given that it's part of the Utah's 3rd Congressional District, affects a lot of districts and states. But President BeGaye, I want to ask you, the EPA administrator said, quote, the EPA has closely coordinated, and then she goes on to include the Navajo Nation. What's your assessment of the close coordination of the EPA?
Thank you for the question. And first of all, the coordination, if it means waiting 2 days before you're notified, I would not label that as coordination. The first time we had conversation was at a conference call on Friday afternoon, where EPA told us that the cleanup would take decades to complete. I was stunned by that statement because I thought that, as EPA said before, at a hearing, public hearing on Saturday evening, the next day they said that the base of the mountain, the water was clearing up, and we had just returned, that was Sunday afternoon. We had just returned from the mountain and taken photos of the river, went to the mouth of the mountain, looked inside, and it was still very much the color of orange juice, very much yellow. And I told the EPA person that this is what we saw. And the person that was answering the question to the public at that public forum in Durango, he said, well, I was told different. I was told that it was clearing up. If that's coordination, and if that's what they thought, it was completely false.
What happened when you tried to go visit the site? Describe to us, and our time's short, we got to be quick, but what happened when you went to go visit the site?
We decided to go up there on Saturday and to go up there on Sunday, but we decided to do that on Saturday. So we made a call. We started making calls to Region 6 or to the Denver office. And they said, well, you can only go up to the first blockade and that's it. And so we kept driving towards the location. And so I told that individual that's on my staff, I said, well, call Region 9, see what they say. And so they start talking to the person from Region 9. At that point, we realized that the regions were not talking to one another. So as we got up to the mountain, we were given clearance to first the blockade, and then they said you can only get down to the base, down to the bottom. And you couldn't see very much of what took place. And when we proceeded to drive up, and it was not a really difficult drive up to the area. And I didn't realize that the mouth of the mine was just a little ways further from where we stopped. I thought it was further up, so I jumped out of the SUV and start walking up the hill. And when I got up to the top, that's where the mine was. And so We were first told we could only go up to the blockade, which is about at least 2 miles away. I mean, you can't see a thing. It's all tall pines and so forth. But it was through the other region, Region 9, that gave us a little bit more clearance to move a little bit further up the stream. And even at that point, I didn't realize that we were supposed to stop there. No one told me that that was the stopping point. So I just kept walking, and no one said.
This is. I want to get the full accounting of this, but it is absolutely ridiculous that the president of the Navajo Nation is not allowed to go see what is happening to his people. It is a terrible embarrassment and demands an apology as well. Last thing that I have time for: explain the standard Form 95 and what was happening in the days after the spill to the people there in the Navajo Nation.
On that Sunday afternoon, I got a call, and they're saying we're sending people. They will come and help you. They'll be on the ground to assist you. And I was, I was very thankful that EPA responded so quickly, that they sent 2 people to help us monitor the situation. And so they flew into Durango. They took a car down from there to Farmington on to Shiprock, as that's what they told me. And so later on, we discovered that they were in the communities up and down the river giving out this standard Form 95. We didn't know that was taking place until one of the local officials in one of the communities called us up and said, this is what they're passing out. What do we do with it? And our Navajo Attorney General took a look at the form and immediately caught the waiver language. I asked to see it. They explained what that meant to me, what that meant to our farmers and our ranchers. And so we immediately put the word out. We got on radio immediately. I called the radio station and in my Navajo language explained to the people not to sign that form, because if you do, you're not going to get full compensation for the damages that you incurred. And we did news releases. We put the word out there. Some of the local papers ran that story on our behalf, because this was just a slap in the face. We felt that the EPA was trying to minimize the damage payments that they were going to make, and that was our experience with Standard Form 95.
Okay, we went over a little bit there, but I think we can handle it with this size of a panel. Mr. Cartwright, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to the witnesses for coming today. President BeGaye, Councilman, is it Olen? Dr. Walk, Mr. Flynn. Now, Councilman Olen, you've testified that there are approximately 23,000 abandoned mines in Colorado. I mentioned earlier in this hearing today that the advocacy group Earthworks estimates that there are more than 500,000 abandoned hard rock mines within the United States. Ranking Member Grijalva is not here, but his bill, H.R. 963, the Hard Rock Mining Reform and Reclamation Act of 2015, would establish a hard rock minerals fund funded as an extraction fee taken from the mine owners and the mine operators for reclamation, to repair and fix these toxic situations. President BeGaye, would you support the establishment of that kind of dedicated fund paid for by the mining industry that would be used to clean up abandoned hard rock mines?
Yes, Congressman Cartwright. Whoever caused these types of spill, they ought to be held accountable, whoever they are.
How about you, Councilman Olen? Do you feel the same way? Would you support the establishment of a hard rock materials fund, a minerals fund, along the lines that Ranking Member Grijalva's bill suggests?
Well, without reviewing it just from the initial intake, I could see us probably supporting it just from the standpoint of cleanup.
Okay, thank you. And one thing I wanted to clear up for my own mind is to see if there's any disagreement among the panel. You know, we had Dr. Walk testifying that by August 11, the levels of monitored metals in the Animas River had returned to pre-release levels, that there was no fish kill involved in this release, and I wanted to get your take on that, President BeGaye and Councilman Olen. Do you agree with that?
Well, we do not put dollar before the health of our people, our land, our water. And we, in our own testing, Navajo Nation EPA has told us that there are high levels of metals, sediments, contaminants that's unhealthy for our animals. And so we have become a dumping ground for wastewater because the Animas River is quite different from the San Juan. The San Juan is slow moving, so anything that comes down to Animas, because it's high altitude, gets into our slow moving water, and that's where they settle.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilman Olen, I think you testified that you knew about this spill the afternoon because local officials had notified you, and that because of that early knowledge, you were able to take steps to do testing before the plume hit the affected area that you're concerned with. Is that what your testimony was?
That's correct.
Okay. So what's your take on what Dr. Wolk says? Was there a fish kill? He says there was not.
Well, based on the collaboration, coordination we had there, that same information was reported to us, and we as Southern U do not have any information contrary to that.
Okay, and then he said that by August 11, what is it, 6 days after the release, that the metals levels had returned to pre-release levels. Any basis to dispute that?
No.
Okay.
Based on our testing, again, we came up with probably similar information, particularly with pH.
Okay. And either of you gentlemen, President BeGaye, Councilman Olen, do you support increased levels of funding to EPA in cleaning up problems like this into the future?
For Navajo Nation, we have the expertise, we have the engineers, we have scientists running our Navajo Nation EPA. EPA can provide the funds, or whoever entity, whatever federal agency can provide us the fund, and we can do our own cleanup, and we will do it in the way it should be done properly. Thank you.
Councilman Olen, do you support additional increased funding for cleanup?
Yes, we would.
Thank you, gentlemen. I yield back.
Mr. Grothman.
Thank you. I have some questions for Secretary Flynn. Spent a lot of time in Wisconsin government, and I know how important it is for the EPA and the local, I guess you call your Department of Environment and Natural Resources to work together. Go over some of the things you said before. When did you first hear about the spill?
I heard about it on Thursday morning at about 9:30 in the morning from the Southern Ute tribe. Actually, I heard about it from a staff member who had just received notice from the Southern Ute tribe.
You didn't even hear about it from the EPA first?
No.
And how long was it after the spill first took place?
It was about 24 hours when we received notice.
By somebody other than the EPA?
Yes.
How did that delay affect your ability to respond?
Well, it's difficult to quantify. When you're in an emergency situation, every second counts. We were acting. EPA had initially put out some information regarding the velocity the plume was traveling in the river, which, based on their initial estimates, suggested the plume was going to arrive late in the night on Thursday, in the very early morning hours of Friday. So based on that information, we began taking action such as closing irrigation ditches. That information proved to be wrong, and as a result of that incorrect information, we lost time where farmers could continue to take money, continue to withdraw into their irrigation ditches to build up their supply when we did have to shut the river down.
I don't know whether anything similar like this would have ever happened, anywhere near this horrible would have happened in New Mexico. But could you maybe compare that to how quickly you would have notified, say, adjacent landowners or people downstream of a spill if it was something that you were responsible for?
Immediately, within an hour. I would have personally called. Well, I can just tell you what we did here. We contacted the Navajo Nation. We contacted the state of Utah. We contacted the state of Arizona. We immediately contacted San Juan County and the local communities, and that didn't occur over hours. We didn't have a phone call list that we needed to. I mean, we drill emergency responses. We have a protocol that's in place, and we just moved forward with our plan. And literally within hours, we had notified all the downstream communities and taken steps to immediately stop withdrawing public water systems from the river and other actions.
I don't know if you have any employees that callous, but how would have you responded if, say, you found out one of your employees knew about an equivalent spill and just didn't tell anybody about it for a day?
They'd be former employees.
You heard the testimony came before you. Do you want to comment in general on her testimony, or did you feel her testimony was what you describe as an accurate recount of what you saw on the ground?
Sure. I have a great amount of respect for Administrator McCarthy. I think one of the flaws that, hindsight is 20/20, but this was an issue that we raised immediately on the ground during the emergency, and it's an issue or a couple issues that we continue to face. I think the administrator is tenacious and absolutely holds herself to a very high standard. I don't think that the employees who were actually charged with managing this situation held themselves to that same standard. I think that the lack of involvement from headquarters actually hindered this effort, and there was a lot of infighting among. They chose to handle this as a regional emergency. They didn't actually elevate it to a regional emergency operation, as I mentioned in my testimony, until the day after the contamination plume had already arrived in the state of New Mexico. So I think that the reluctance of EPA headquarters and management to become directly involved in this certainly played a huge role in hindering our efforts. I don't think there has been close work with the state or close collaboration. And for example, just today, I understand EPA is going to unroll a long-term monitoring plan. First of all, we've told them all along for the past couple of weeks that we have a long-term monitoring plan, and they should be supporting our plan, not developing their own plan in a vacuum without consulting or collaborating with the state. My time is almost up, or your time, sorry, sir, is almost up, so I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Are you done?
No.
We're a little bit.
And we'll just give one
more minute. I've given the others 1 minute. Go
frequently, because we had kind of the same interaction in the state of Wisconsin, frequently you have situations in which the Environmental Protection Agency or the local DNR would deal with something. Do you think this country would be well served if, insofar as we could, we would give responsibilities for protecting our nation's resources to local, state, natural resource departments rather than the EPA? Do you guys feel, at least in New Mexico, that you seem to exhibit more of a sense of urgency or care about our natural resources?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's just human nature that the people who actually live on the land, whose neighbors live on the land, who depend on the land, have the most skin in the game and are going to do the best job to conserve and manage those resources. So I absolutely believe that states should be given strong deference. I think that when the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, I think that Congress envisioned there to be a cooperative federalist model when they adopted these statutes and actually spoke to deferring to states on these decisions. I don't think that's been the case, certainly over the past couple of years, in particular on the Waters of the United States rule. That's an issue where New Mexico was among the coalition of states that did successfully sue and enjoin EPA in the North Dakota district. I do think states should have greater control over these resources because we're in the best position to manage and understand their impacts.
I agree with you, and we'll see if we can do something about that.
All right, now I'm going to catch off. Even though you were answering one of my questions, we let it. I'm going to break the the rules again here. Mr. Pierce, let me come down to you before. I have a lot of questions for you. Let me go to the other members of our panel here. Mr. Pierce, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that courtesy. President BeGaye, you heard me try to get assurances that these Form 95s will, if they were signed mistakenly or people weren't sure, I didn't get a clear answer from the administrator. Maybe you understood it better, but just take my word that if they try to hold people to signatures that they didn't know what they were signing, or they have tried to enforce waivers, then know that we'll be a partner with you in that. And we will also work on individual cases, so it's not kind of a generality. Refer those people to our office, and we will stand side by side with them until we get that answer. We've found that to be more effective than just writing a letter on behalf of something. And then also with respect to the water that was released out of the Navajo Dam, just again, understand that we will help push that question. That's going to be a significant question downstream, and I'm familiar enough with some of the agencies that I think you might have a lot of difficulty getting a resolution to that. Secretary Flynn, thank you very much for the kind comments coming in, but your leadership in this, I really appreciate that. Now, we've heard testimony today that the spill at Gold King Mine doesn't appear to have significantly affected or changed the water quality of the Seaman Creek or Animas. Is that something you would agree with as they come into New Mexico, that basically this is no big deal?
No, absolutely not. I agree that the pollution passed with the water column, and that was expected. Nobody has ever stated that the water quality would not rebound as the toxic plume moves through the river. The issue, which my colleague from Colorado did acknowledge, is what's left after that plume moves through the river. And so you have high levels of dangerous metals such as arsenic and lead, which have now been deposited in the sediment. And each and every time there's a stormwater event or there's a spring runoff following snowpack, that contamination, that sediment will become agitated and potentially mobilize those contaminants and create a public health issue. There's also again, while the wildlife, I'm sorry, I'm speaking too long, but the water quality has rebounded, but again, the sediment that has been deposited, the impacts on wildlife, macroinvertebrates in particular, are unknown and will not be understood for years. So while I agree that the water quality has rebounded to background levels, that's not really the issue. The issue is what was left over in the sediment that's now all along the river.
New Mexico Tech, also known as the Mining Institute in New Mexico, went into Colorado, and if you back up the pictures one, they discovered those heavy metals that you're describing on the bottom of these rocks there in the stream bed. And the next picture shows they took a sample of that groundwater, which is right there. So definitely the effects are in the groundwater, and so I think I share the President's concern and also your concern for the residents of New Mexico. Now, we heard from the administrator that all of the processes were followed, that it's typical, Secretary, for you to be notified by someone different than the EPA when they were describing the process, and the question was that you weren't notified. They said, oh, but she said, that's the way that we do it. We use someone else to notify. Is that your experience, really?
No.
Okay,
no.
Yeah, I didn't think so. There were many things there. Can you describe that process of closing off the inputs? Again, you heard my questions to the administrator, and she kept trying to kind of give us bureaucratic doublespeak. So you describe the process that you all went through.
Sure. Well, once we were notified about the plume, we saw the pictures and had conversations with some of the people who were on the ground and had witnessed what had occurred. We immediately contacted. There's 7 public water systems in San Juan County that withdraw water from the river. We immediately contacted those systems and told them to stop diverting from the river. We did that unilaterally. That was done by the state without any consultation or coordination with EPA. After that, though, EPA did berate one of the EPA communication staffers from Region 6 did berate one of my communication staffers that we did not do a joint press release or otherwise publicize that decision because they felt like it was a lost opportunity to develop some positive publicity in response to the spill. And I then berated the EPA regional office for wasting time getting into a public relations issue when we're dealing with an emergency.
Dealing with the question. Mr. Chairman, if possible, I've got one more question. Dr. Wilk, in your testimony, you say, unfortunately, the existing programs, regulations, and fundings are limited and do not provide us with the means we need to adequately address the abandoned mine contamination in Colorado. If the funds were unlimited, what would the course of action be to remedy the problem?
Thank you, sir. Well, I think it depends on the situation because...
now, if you got the situation we're facing right now with that Gold King mine, unlimited funds, what would the solution have been and would be?
I think there's a short-term solution to continue to treat the water and find more of a longer-standing treatment facility solution that could go in place, and then a remediation at the mine itself.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Tipton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the panel for sitting there for an extended period of time. Councilman Olen, we'd had an opportunity to be able to visit just a little bit. Southern Ute Tribe, Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, small communities in southwest Colorado. Would you describe for us, when did the EPA reach out to you? I believe you'd cited earlier, you heard from the city of Durango. When did the EPA reach out to you?
Well, first off, let me just acknowledge and thank you for your leadership on this. EPA, to my knowledge, had not officially contacted the Southern Ute Tribe, and I'm talking the administrator, had not made a call to the tribe, the chairman's office, until this Monday, September 14th.
September 14th. That's an extended period of time. Is that showing due respect to a governmental entity out of the EPA?
Well, in my opinion, when you look at the government-to-government relationships and trust responsibility, in my opinion, that is way too long.
But would you care to expand? I thought it was actually pretty impressive out of the Southern Ute Tribe, being proactive, taking the initiative to be able to respond and to be able to meet the needs of the community. Is there something that the EPA could maybe learn from you?
Boy, that's going to be hard to answer because I guess from our perspective, I mean, we really don't heavily depend on the federal government to do our work, to protect our interests. And for us, you know, we always roll our sleeves up, get in the middle of it, address our needs immediately. And then, of course, whatever information we gather, we do hire the best people, the most qualified people. And, of course, we deal with people that are not producing the level and quality that we expect as well. So I think if nothing else, it's definitely holding people accountable and responsible for actions.
Right. And President BeGaye, I do want to applaud you for getting the word out on that Form 95. We'd heard that as well and found it incredibly disturbing that the EPA was trying to be able to get a waiver for the Navajo Nation, people in particular, to be able to respond and to be able to seek real responsibility and accountability out of the EPA. Dr. Woke would like to maybe ask you a couple of questions. And do you think Colorado does a pretty good job in terms of monitoring? We have engineers in Colorado, don't we?
Yes, sir, we do, depending on the situation. But we have water quality engineers, mine engineers, and so we work collaboratively with the EPA and others to provide those resources so that, as you know, we have a Colorado solution.
And we've got a Colorado solution, and part of your job is to make sure that the people of the state of Colorado, and we've obviously got a concurrent responsibility to our neighboring states as well, that the water is going to actually be safe. Does it concern you when we hear that, as Chairman Bishop noted in follow-up to my question, that they have 0 engineers at the EPA, that they were up working on a mine that they said had the high potential to be able to blow out? Would the state of Colorado handle it that way?
It concerns me, but I'm not sure that doesn't mean that engineers weren't involved in some capacity. So not.
Well, you're in the government, and it's your job to have some actual oversight. Wouldn't it have been prudent for the EPA to have had their engineers to be able to have the oversight, to be able to make some good choices before we had a catastrophe?
I don't know how they structure or operate and whether they rely on other resources to provide that engineering.
But you'd handle it very differently as the state of Colorado.
As I said, our department has its own engineers depending on the situation.
You know, when we're talking, I'd like to follow up on my colleague, Mr. Pierce's comments there. If you had an unlimited budget, what do we do going forward, given what we've seen out of the Gold King mine? Would you be supportive of Good Samaritan legislation?
Well, I serve at the pleasure of the governor, and so I'm not sure it's my position to say, but I know the governor and our congressional delegates in the past and most of the western states have been very active in trying to promote and support Good Samaritan legislation to help address these kind of situations.
Right. You know, Councilman Olen, would you maybe describe a little bit some of the challenges and the economics for us in maybe a little more depth that you are facing as a Southern Ute tribe based off of the EPA spill, how it's impacting us in southern Colorado and for you specifically?
Well, economic impacts for us, aside from any costs that we've incurred, is still to be determined, particularly when you have this particular area, Durango, Silverton, the Four Corners, southwest Colorado, and even New Mexico. You know, it's a tourist area, and for us, some of our our casino, as an example, you know, same people that visit Durango, possibly visit Silverton, the Four Corners, are the same people that visit us. And particularly when you have the world news saying, here's a toxic waste site, well, it scares people. People cancel reservations, cancel trips. The economy goes down based on that, and I think that's something we have to really look at is what really was our impact when it comes to economic events that happened because of this spill.
Great. Thank you for being here.
Of both committees for allowing us to be here, of members that are not on this committee. I thank you so very much, and for holding this critical hearing. To all the witnesses here, I want to thank you for taking time away from home and responsibilities I know that are pressing so that you can be here to testify. One, on what needs to happen to make people whole, to make sure that there is adequate response and real communication between each and every one of you and the people that we are so honored to represent, and how we can prevent this from happening again in the future, where there's several pieces that we've been able to identify. I want to associate myself with the comments and questions that Cynthia Loomis, our colleague from Wyoming, shared with the line of questioning that was with EPA Administrator McCarthy as well. And one of the points I want to make, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if this has been shared, but there's a memo that came out from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, Region 8, dated August 17, 2015, if we may be able to submit this into the record.
Without objection.
What this states is the timeline associated with the communications that went to all the communities. What this states is on 8/5/2015 at 10:51, the release occurs. There's then a series of other items. You have to get to 8/6/2015, the next day, 24 hours later, where it states at 11 a.m., EPA headquarters, Region 6 and Region 9 are notified. I'm not even talking about the notification to the state of New Mexico, what happened up in Colorado, to the Ute tribe, and to the Navajo Nation. We have a problem here that has to be corrected. One of the areas, Secretary Flynn, I know I shared this with you yesterday. I've shared this with Secretary McCarthy. I mentioned this to my colleague, Mr. Tipton, out of Colorado as well. Is for us, Mr. Chairman, to potentially look at the system that's put in place today for the Amber Alert system for abducted children, as well as the National Weather System alerts. When there's a system like this so that we have alerts on there, do you think, Mr. Secretary, that would be helpful in pushing out as much information as we can, Secretary Flynn and President BeGaye, especially as constituents? What are your thoughts there? If there would have been real-time instant notification, would that have been beneficial?
Congressman Lujan, absolutely. I think that's a great idea.
And, Mr. President, rapid communication, if there's an urgency like this, that didn't occur, and we need to correct that. Is this something that would make a difference in being able to prepare for anything that may be coming our way?
Absolutely, it would help. And in this case, we're the ones that took action to close our irrigation gates, not EPA. We're the ones that made those decisions based on information that came down to us. And so if we received that quicker, we would have responded better and prepared better. Our people would have been ready rather than being thrust into a state of uncertainty. Yes.
I appreciate that. And I also want to thank Councilman Olen for our brothers and sisters up in Colorado with the Ute tribe for alerting many of the communities in New Mexico. It was through the leadership of being good neighbors that you alerted some of the neighbors into New Mexico, sir. And so to you and to the tribal leaders, just thank you so very much. Secretary Flynn and President BeGaye, is there anything, as you sat through this hearing today, and I know it was a long one, with all the questions, with the testimony today and in the Senate, with the several hearings that you've heard, is there anything that is coming out of the EPA that you have concerns with or that you heard today that you have concerns with? And what is it that we can do to make sure that there is someone from headquarters appointed, Mr. Chairman, from the EPA to be corresponding directly with the state of New Mexico, state of Colorado, the Ute tribe, Navajo Nation as well, that you would like to see done that maybe we can convey? And so to give the rest of my time, I have a little bit under a minute, so Mr. Secretary, if you could quickly jump on that and maybe submit things in writing, and then we'll visit with the President and with the Navajo Nation so we can fulfill all of those requests and make sure that we're able to convey that.
I've been giving extra time. You got 2 minutes.
Thank you there, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that, sir. Thank you.
Congressman Lujan, you know, I think that based on a lot of the discussions and debate that I've seen, the real question I think that needs to continue to be pressed, which I've heard a lot of today, is what types of institutional reforms can we put in place as a result of this incident? And so things like early notification, ways to improve that I think that's really focusing on how we can evaluate the performance and move forward. I think there's a lot of kind of PR and spin that's coming out to try to put a bow on this and move on, instead of really asking the difficult questions on institutional reforms. So that's a concern I have. I also have a major concern about the structure of the quote-unquote independent investigation being conducted by the Department of Interior. I don't truly believe that's an independent investigation. It would be difficult for me to investigate another member of my cabinet working under Governor Martinez. I think that a truly independent investigation should occur so that the right questions that will bring about institutional improvements can be asked, and we can make government work better. We all have a stake in government working better and learning from this.
Thank you very much.
Congressman Lujan, thank you for the questions. Number one, don't let this happen again. Superfund site, clean that thing up. Don't let yellow water come down into our river again. Secondly, on Senate Form 95, we need the U.S. Attorney General's opinion saying that waiver is not final. You can continue to submit claims for damages. We need that opinion. We don't trust the word of McCarthy, and we need a legal opinion from the U.S. Attorney General so that we can feel much better about telling our people that they can continue to submit the form and also to be compensated continuously until all of this is resolved. And also that dilution is not the solution. And that's what EPA's term of cleanup is. It is not ours. They need to get out there, remove soil that are contaminated, remove that yellow soil from our land, and make sure that it is clean. But just diluting it by releasing the more water from the dam is not the way to clean up the spill that's taken place on our land. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, again, for the time and your thoughtfulness. I look forward to working with you to address all these issues. We need to get to the bottom of this. And I'm also working on a piece of legislation with my counterparts in the U.S. Senate from New Mexico that would ask and require for expeditious carry out of the claims process and for the establishment of those offices in these communities, so that way there can be technical assistance to the individuals that will be also asking for support there. So thank you so much again for the indulgence, Mr. Chairman. To the witnesses, thank you for your testimony, for being here today.
Thank you, but we won't treat you seriously till you come back to the committee.
Yes, sir.
All right. Mr. Palmer, do you have questions?
Thank you, Chairman Bishop. Secretary Flynn made the point that though the water levels rose, the plume moved downstream. When it receded and water levels returned to normal level, it left contaminated sediment. My question to the tribal leaders, Mr. BeGaye and Mr. Olen, is does any of this impact any of the sacred places, places sacred to the Navajo Nation or to the Southern Ute tribes? Mr. BeGaye.
Thank you, Congressman Palmer. Pollen from corn is sacred to us. It is used for early morning prayers. It is used in ceremonies extensively. And by the corn maturing quicker, it has hurt the pollen from germinating, from maturing. And our people are very concerned that they're not going to have enough pollen for their ceremonies, for their morning prayers to be used in that way. And you have all of these plants that are medicine people use that grow along the river. Those are being tainted, and they are no longer wanting to gather these herbal plants that is used in ceremonies along the river. So yes, it has definitely damaged that part of our culture that is sacred to us.
Mr. Olen.
Well, I would have to say that when we look at the Ute ancestors, I mean, those mountains were our homelands. So I think it starts right there. When the mining industry came about and we were removed from that area. Where we're located now, you know, the water is a sacred source of life for us. You know, water produces life. And that's one of the, and we were removed from that area. Where we're located now, you know, the water is a sacred source of life for us. You know, water produces life. And that's one of the 8 rivers that crosses the reservation. And of course, we do have cultural sites along the river. We don't make those public by any means, but the people that live along the river, the tribal people, I mean.
There really isn't any way that you can put a price on the damage in that regard. Let me ask you this, and this question will go to the gentleman from Colorado and New Mexico as well, but I'll start back with Mr. BeGaye. Considering this in terms of your culture and what's sacred to you, if the EPA were to declare these Superfund sites, what would the long-term ramifications be in that regard?
Well, for us, they need to clean up the mines that are up there, because if it is not, and another blowout will occur, as we were told when we were standing alongside the person that actually was working the backhoe when the blowout occurred. He was saying there's other mines on the other side that's ready to blow out. And so we don't want that to occur again and again and again. And it will, if it does, it will really hurt our sacred areas, our sacred plants, and our people will be, their lives will be disrupted continuously.
Mr. Olen.
Well, at this point, it's probably going to be hard for us to say, but I guess cleaning up the river, cleaning up the water, it is utmost importance.
Well, I would, I'll let Dr. Walk answer next, and I've got a final point, and we'll be out of here.
Just on the notion or the decision to make it a Superfund site, it's a little bit more complicated because the local community obviously has a very large voice in that, as well as the state. We have very successful examples of Superfund sites that have been restorative and have a sustainability plan now going forward. So it's certainly a viable option.
Mr. Flynn. Secretary Flynn.
Congressman, I think Superfund sites certainly have a place in environmental cleanup. However, I don't think that Superfund is really designed to solve all of the problems. In fact, when you have a responsible party who's doing work, I think Superfund adds levels of bureaucracy that can actually slow down environmental cleanup projects. So I think Superfund is most effective when there isn't a responsible party who is actually there doing cleanup work. We have 14 Superfunds in our state. It can be absolutely used effectively, but there's a huge fuel spill that we're cleaning up where we've designated a Superfund site in our largest metropolitan area, and we've actually moved much faster by I don't think it would be appropriate to be a Superfund site, but we have a responsible party, and we've been able to get a lot more work done by not declaring it a Superfund site.
If the chairman indulges me just for a final statement here, my sense of this would be it would be beneficial to all of you to avoid a Superfund site because of what it's going to do in terms of people viewing your tourist sites, property values, and things of that nature. I think the most important thing is something Secretary Flynn touched on, and that in the previous hearing, Congressman Bruce Westman touched on, and that is making sure that whoever is dealing with the cleanup is qualified, that they have the engineering expertise, they have the technical expertise. You just don't send anybody out there with a backhoe to do this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you. Ms. Lemus, do you have some questions for these witnesses before I do mine?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do. And
Go for it.
I appreciate your accommodation. Thank you all for attending. I, of course, had an opportunity to ask Director McCarthy some questions this morning, and I would like to pose some of those same questions to you. I'm going to start with Mr. Flynn. Could you explain to me how the EPA's lack of communication affected your ability to respond?
Sure. Congresswoman, I guess I've already discussed kind of the short-term issues, but really the bigger problems occurred as we were working through the emergency, where we were constantly having to fight to get information and data from EPA. And that really, the more information we could receive, the quicker we could make decisions about when it would be appropriate to start withdrawing water from the river again, for example. So the lack of timeliness with respect to providing data, we had all kinds of excuses, but the bottom line is we just really needed that information in order to help develop a response plan. And for some of these issues, we needed the supply of water for the public water systems. Some of the smaller systems was extremely limited, so they had a couple days of reserve. And so in order to really make decisions, we had to be able to plan out 7-10 days just to mobilize people to actually put physical infrastructure in place to create an alternative supply, a backup resource. So not having data in the first couple of days and then continuing to have to make that fight put us in a position where we had to take very conservative actions, and in one case we had to actually lay pipe and connect one system because we weren't sure we were going to be able to allow the system to withdraw from the river because of an absence of information.
Okay. Councillor Olen, and excuse me if I mispronounced your name, welcome to our committee. Could you tell us generally how the disaster has affected the Southern Ute tribe?
Well, generally, it's just, I guess the way I can express it is, of course, we had to respond to it. First and foremost, we had to deal with the disaster by having to implement our emergency management plan and our team and start incurring cost to address our needs for our membership. And that's probably the biggest thing is that hit us right away. Of course, you never plan for a disaster, but when you do have the plan, it really kicks in.
Okay. President BeGaye, same question. How has the disaster affected the Navajo Nation? And do you have any estimates at this point how much you think it'll cost to fix it, to return you to the pre-spill condition?
It has really devastated our nation. 215 miles that the river lies on our nation. A third of the population utilizes it in varying ways: ranching, medicine, farming. And our farmers, when you look into their faces and you stand alongside them, and they're telling you that they're still giving water to a melon that is this size, they know it's gone, I know it's gone, but they continue to give water to it because it's like children, their family. Watermelon plant, a corn stalk, all of that. They're very closely connected to their farm, to their crops in a spiritual way. It is very difficult to place a price on that type of relationship with nature that we have. And so it will be extensive. and we cannot at this moment put a price on it. We really are reluctant to do so in many ways, culturally, but we will do that. We will do so. Our people are hurting, and when you see EPA pulling out, and you have water tanks that are being pulled off, you have hay that's not being provided because of the spill that was caused by their workers, it's really devastating. At this moment, our nation is hurting.
Has either tribe received any initial compensation for direct out-of-pocket expenses incurred by either tribe immediately after the incident?
Navajo Nation, we have not received a single penny yet.
We have not received anything, but we are working with the EPA on a cooperative agreement to be reimbursed.
Are you going to, so you're working on something that is in the nature of ongoing compensation, or is the federal government demanding that it be a complete settlement, cutting off future reimbursement or compensation for injury? Has anyone approached you about those kinds of proposals?
We have, Congresswoman, thank you. Our leaders in one community contacted our office saying that there's a form being passed out by EPA workers, 2 workers, and we don't know what it is. We don't know whether we should fill this out or not.
Okay.
We got a hold of one, the Attorney General, Navajo Nation Attorney General, who is also a graduate of Harvard Law, reviewed it, looked at it, determined that this was a final settlement form, that if they fill it out, it compensated, that was it. And so we felt, and so I got on radio in Navajo language, explained what it was to them, and everyone stopped filling out the forms. But we need an interim form now. We need the Attorney General to give us a legal opinion. We will not take the word of Administrator McCarthy that the compensation will continue. We don't believe that until we see it in writing, clearly spelled out by the Attorney General of the United States.
My time has expired, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your accommodation of my questions.
You're welcome. Mr. Grijalva, you're the second to the last question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman Bishop. Let me just, to the Councilman and Mr. President, thank you very much for being here. With, and the Navajo Nation rightfully is concerned and vigilant about contamination related to mining, given the legacy and how members have suffered through the uranium contamination issues and other issues. So, Mr. President, your points are well taken. Cultural resources, sacred sites issues, quite vital. The San Juan and the assurance that that flow is nurturing and not hurtful, essential. Reimbursement and the settlement of claims as they appear needs to be expedited. One of my colleagues earlier in the question said that this incident now is causing distrust with the federal government in terms of notification and consultation. I don't think it happened now. This is a pattern, and I think one of the points that I think both, and Councilman Olen as well, is that I think we need to codify how this notification happens into law. We need to codify how consultation happens with Native nations so that there is a process and a checklist that is not left to somebody's subjective analysis. That's the law, and that's what should be followed. And so I want to thank you for bringing that today. And I wanted to ask Dr. Wolk, describe, if you can, as quickly as you can, the condition of the Animas rivers over the past decade or so. Had the water quality been getting better or getting worse if you look at that period of time, or is that a possible question?
Thank you, sir. I think over the past 10 years, the water quality has been gradually deteriorating, and that's as using as a resultant the decreased amount of fish in numbers, as well as certain species of trout. So mostly as it relates to aquatic life, it hasn't deteriorated to the point of not being suitable for intake for drinking water or for use of recreational purposes or irrigation purposes, but certainly it's been deteriorating.
You know, the present 428 on the priority list, 428 sites that are being worked on, constructed, reclamation issues, that doesn't tell us, and so whatever a waiting list is really hard to gauge, because until those are done with the resources available, more and more can be piling on, waiting for an opportunity to get on that priority list. And as you know, and I'm glad for all the witnesses today. I wish that a representative of the National Mining Association would have been here so that we could inquire as to what role the private sector should have going down the future, how they feel about extraction on public lands and a royalty attached to that extraction, so it goes toward those 428 and these incidents like happened in Animas and how it's affected communities across the board. And I mention that because I think the truth is, and that's in closing, just let me say that there was a ticking bomb, and that was the abandoned mines and the abandoned King mine that affected the Animas. People called the bomb squad. In this case, unfortunately, the bomb squad set it off where they were trying to defuse it. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle today gathered to attack the bomb squad. And our side of the aisle very urgently, with everyone involved, the states, the native nations, want to work together to try to defuse the other bombs we know are out there. And that's what we're looking for in the future. I think before we make the bomb squad the bad guys, let's come to some conclusions as to how we go forward, dealing with a backlog and a catalog of similar situations across this country and across the West. With that, thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I have a series of statements and documents that I wish unanimous consent to put into the record, and hearing no objection, I get to do it. Let me be the last to actually ask a few questions to you. President BeGaye, if I can start with you. Has President Obama reached out to your tribe, called, talked to you, visited?
President Obama has been silent. Seemingly, he closed his door on the Navajo Nation in its greatest time of need, and so we're yet to hear from the White House.
I also have, well, let me go on. Thank you. Oh, now, let me clarify the one thing. When you were prohibited from going closer to the site by EPA, that was on your sovereign territory where they said you couldn't go any further. Is that correct?
This was up in above Silverton, and it was on Colorado land.
Okay, thank you. That clarified it. Secretary Flynn, the EPA has asserted that they have sought to be transparent and work with states in supplying needed information. Has that really been your experience?
Chairman, no, I think there's a lot of room for improvement by the EPA on this effort. I have a good kind of graph or a series of graphs that I would like to kind of show you and submit into the record. Now, this first graph, this was actually developed by EPA on August 7th, the Friday right before the plume actually hit New Mexico. This was based on information that EPA had taken from Colorado, just south of the spill, and they quickly put this graph out with a message to the public as like a PR gesture. And there's a couple notable things about it. The first is that my scientists were insulted by this graph for a variety of reasons. The first was that it plotted all the metals on a linear scale. So if you just look at the bottom, it looks like lead and cadmium are totally flatline, like zero. And you can't really see, but the very bottom line is actually two metals that it's representing. They only provided dissolved metals when the EPA's drinking water maximum contaminant levels are based on total, not dissolved concentrations. And the graph doesn't have anything about arsenic, which we knew was over 823 times the maximum contaminant limit at the time of the spill. So if you look at that graph, and then I had a second graph that my staff actually developed, a second series of graphs that I don't know if they're available in the record, but okay, so this is what would be a logarithmic graph, which is really what would be the scientifically valid way to present this information. And if you could go to the final graph, because this really illustrates a point. This is actually how you would represent the concentrations of lead using the same exact information EPA presented in that first graph that was EPA's, where you saw lead just like it was right at zero, flatlining along the line. This last graph shows you the actual concentrations of lead from their data, and that orange line shows you what the maximum contaminant levels are in the Safe Drinking Water Act. So, that was not done by any scientist. That was a PR stunt that was done immediately after the plume had hit based on data that we had repeatedly asked for and were not provided. I don't think any scientist at EPA had any hand in this because it was so insulting to my staff that I just can't imagine a scientist would be involved in this development. And, that was the first of a number of instances where I don't think EPA certainly was forthcoming with information.
If those are not part of the record, we'll make them as part of the record under UC as well. So there are times that they provide you data in a way that's not really helpful. I'm assuming there are also times when EPA would not provide you data or important information or excluded you from the response process?
Yes, Chairman Bishop. On Friday, August 21st, this is now well over 2 weeks after the spill occurred, we've been fighting back and forth for a copy of EPA's sediment sampling plan because, like I said before, when the plume moves with the water column, the water quality is going to rebound, but really the sediment sampling is what tells you what's been left over, and that's critical. So we've been fighting with EPA, my staff, this is on a staff-to-staff level, and asking for this plan for weeks. And on the 21st, EPA claimed that they couldn't provide it because it contained business, quote-unquote, business confidential information, and raised a number of other excuses. I was incredulous at that response. I just can't imagine that. They had also claimed that they were concerned about New Mexico's open records law. We have a very broad Public Records Act that does not contain the same degree of exclusions that that the Freedom of Information Act allows. So they were concerned about the breadth of our Public Records Act and that we would be disclosing more information than would otherwise be required. And those were just a couple of the reasons. And I'd be happy to supplement the record with documents if that's
so you guys are too transparent, huh?
Yeah, that was essentially one of the concerns that was raised.
Let me ask you about the Department of Interior, the Forest Service, BLM, Park Service, BIA. What was their reaction? Could they have been more helpful?
On Friday morning, about 5 a.m., I was in the area, and I did speak to some kind of the local staff, 2 people there. We had asked them to allow more water, to release more water from the Navajo lake in order to help preserve 2 of the endangered species in the area, the Colorado pike minnow and the razorback sucker. And those staffers were great, and they kind of acted first without asking. My sense is they just acted on their own. Other than that contact that we initiated right away, it was really, I'd say Interior's involvement was non-existent, and other than seeing a press release that they're now investigating, and I don't really understand what they're investigating because the press release didn't really provide a lot of information.
That was one of the reasons why we were hoping they would be part of the panel today, and they chose not to be, to ask those questions like what are they actually planning on doing somewhere around here. Has EPA been any more straightforward with the issue of reimbursement of the cost to New Mexico?
No, I think we were last week. I was really taken aback when lower level staffers at EPA reached out to lower level. And I'm obviously just referring to the organization chart there, but these are non-management employees. EPA had made some contact to a couple of my staffers, as well as a couple of staffers from the Homeland Security, trying to gather information about the total costs that were expended related to this. And we've the Navajo Nation, as well as the state of New Mexico, the state of Colorado, the state of Utah, others are considering legal action. It really was, as an attorney myself, it was very surprising to me that they would seek to try to gather this information in that manner. I would expect that it would be done at a high level. I instructed my staff, and the governor instructed all the other staff, that the communication needs to be flowing through leadership at a kind of leadership level, and that we weren't going to communicate in that way. It just seemed like kind of bad faith, and I certainly wouldn't, as a lawyer, that's not the tactics I would use in litigation, to kind of secretly or quietly try to reach out for info without contacting a management level employee.
Okay. Dr. Wilk, let me ask you as well, because the EPA said that as far as notification, I'm glad that Mr. Grijalva kind of summarized that, the problem, that they could have done a better job in notification. Kind of a low bar, but did they actually notify Colorado, or was it you were fortunate enough to have somebody in Colorado who was at the right place at the right time that heard it?
Thank you, sir. We were fortunate enough to have a member of our State Department of Natural Resources there at the site who activated our notification system in-state through our spill line. And so we were able to follow our protocol with regard to in-state notifications for downstream users.
So what you really did is you got notification by serendipity. New Mexico didn't know about it until the Southern Utes recognized that, right? And the Navajo Nation, at what time, who actually notified you?
We were notified by the state of New Mexico.
And then you notified Utah as well?
Yes.
From New Mexico? So actually, when EPA talks about their notification process, it basically was non-existent. They didn't notify squat. It had to be done by other people doing that process. We do have one other member that I think is, I'm stretching here to see if I can get one other person to ask some questions. There's also, is she coming? All right. Let me just kind of end and pontificate this if I could. We have also had votes that are called, so we're going to end this very quickly. I appreciate the notification. I want also to emphasize the fact that you have 3 districts of the EPA that are involved in this area. They also were very late in getting notified. The people on the ground doing that kind of work, they didn't have a great notification process either. So as Congresswoman Lujan Grisham is getting ready, I'll give her the last chance of asking some questions. Let me just say that I have tried to emphasize how frustrated that I am that the EPA insisted on having their own panel that consumed 3 of the 4.5 hours in which we have been here. I don't actually allow that in my committee because I think it's important that the administration, or any administration, actually sits at the same table with those people over whom they make decisions. And had your testimony, which I think is riveting and far more informative than the last 3 hours, had your testimony been given at the same time, we could have had the chance of actually going back to Administrator McCarthy and maybe try and get at some of the root issues that are here. I think sometimes we are saying the same words, but we're not actually meaning the same words. And that is extremely frustrating to me, and it's why I tried to emphasize that so significantly. To me, and it's not just Ms. McCarthy, it's the entire administration that believes they have to be separate and have to go first. I find that arrogant, I find that disgusting. So I want to apologize for the fact that the 4 of you were cooling your heels so long, because the testimony you've given and the questions that you have answered, I think were fascinating, and they would have been beneficial not only for all of the members who were here at the beginning to have heard, but it would be good for the entire EPA entourage who was here to actually hear the responses that you've given, because in many cases they are at sharp contrast with what EPA is telling us has or has not taken place. That's my last rant for the day. Ms. Lujan, I'll let me recognize you for the last questions before we go vote.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your patience and providing me the last word, if you will, which is actually quite an honor. And I get to start by thanking the panel and by all of you being incredibly aware and involved in doing everything we can to help clean up and also look at how we mitigate these kinds of issues in the future, but also address the long-term impacts. And I have a couple of questions, and the first is actually to our own Secretary of Environment for New Mexico, Secretary Flynn. I'm delighted to have you here, and I can tell you that, and I'm sure the committee heard, you were very involved from the very beginning. As soon as you received notice, your office has been instrumental in assisting the EPA, but also New Mexicans to address these issues and figure out what we do going forward. And although the EPA, the data is showing that the surface water contamination is now back to pre-spill levels, we know that the concentration of arsenic, cadmium, lead, and many other heavy metals actually settle to the bottom of the river, and they can be then, as a result, mobilized depending upon a variety of factors, frankly, at any time. And while I would love to control, and I'm sure you would too, the natural flow of rivers and sediment movement, and weather conditions, I think it is critical that we prepare for the long-term environmental consequences and impacts, and that we need to continue to monitor and to collect data and to do the research so that we know that we are protecting the long-term environmental and health impacts for New Mexicans and surrounding the other states surrounding populations. How, Secretary Flynn, I know that you're working with a coalition of stakeholders. I want you to tell us a little bit more about that and to tell me how I can help you make sure that you keep that coalition together and to continue their important work.
Congresswoman, first of all, thank you so much for your interest and all of your time. You've been extremely generous on every issue that we've ever worked on together. So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the question. I think we do it the same way that you and I have personally tackled some of these issues before, such as the fuel spill covering Albuquerque and Kirtland Air Force Base. The way that we've tackled that problem is by including local communities, including local expertise that we have available through our public institutions and our national laboratories, and by including local stakeholder groups. The state of New Mexico has developed a long-term monitoring plan with multi-agencies and multi-groups. We have a number of outstanding NGOs in the area, like the Animas Watershed Group, the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District. We have the New Mexico State University, New Mexico Tech, University of New Mexico. We have Sandia National Lab, Los Alamos National Laboratory, as well as state resources. So we have the expertise in our state, as you are fully aware of. It's how do we coordinate that effort and most importantly get it funded. So I think those are we would like.
And your opinion, Secretary Flynn, is that if left to its own, and I understand that the financial implications for the federal government are significant, but it is their responsibility, that if we don't push for that issue, that there may not be those kinds of investments, and representing, as we both do, a very poor state, the notion that we can pick up a $200,000 or $300,000 annual effort, and I may not get that number right, so correct me and clarify, please. That needs to be in their plan back to us about how they propose to continue to monitor and assess the environmental and health impacts of this spill.
Congresswoman, I think that their plan should be to support our plan. So I really don't. I'm not really. I don't think the fox should be guarding the hen house here. They created the situation. We would never allow a private entity that we're regulating to do its own investigation of itself and accept those results. In order to really build public confidence in the outcome of the long-term monitoring plan, there needs to be an independent entity like multi.
Right. And I'm running out of time, and I totally agree with you. I just want to make sure that I thank again President BeGaye and your incredible work. I'm very upset that the EPA took even longer to notify the Navajo Nation. I appreciate the work by our two senators to look at notification legislation. And because I'm running out of time, perhaps the best thing is I intend to support you, and I think there'll be many members of Congress, and I hope it's a bipartisan effort to require the EPA to have much better relationships and a government to government, recognizing the sovereignty of the Navajo Nation, and that you should expect from your federal government and the state that level of one-to-one collaboration so that you have your plan, your efforts, and your own independent process, and that should be respected and supported, sir. You're welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm sure private citizens hope that same thing would take place. Let me thank the 4 witnesses for being here. I appreciate the long distance you've traveled, for how long you've stayed here. Your written testimony is part of the record. Your oral testimony and answers to these questions were excellent. I appreciate the detail in which you did that. There may be other questions that members may have of you. We will keep our records, our official transcript, what's it called? The record of the committee? Record. Open for 10 days. I'll let the ogre realize you're going to be 10 days, not 5, and which, if there are questions, we may ask for your written responses within that time period. But again, we thank you for your testimony. I promise you that both committees are not going to let this issue just kind of be going through the cracks. We are going to maintain it until we get some definitive answers and some changes before we go forward. So with no other business and without objection, and since I'm the only one here, no one's going to object to it, this committee stands adjourned.